Rolle, as you have made such wonderful comments in this regard, for going forward 50 years as a nation, trying to transition to make sure that we get our matters finished. We would ask everyone on the chat to please cut off your mic so that you would not interrupt the broadcast. We want to be able to go straight into the program. Madam Producer, could you play a commercial or two as we, before I go ahead and introduce our first panelist? Give us a commercial or two as we plan to go into that next session.
She don't know this Connie like it used to be.
Hi, my name is Cornelius McKinney. I am the Deputy Leader of the Bahamas Constitution Party, the BCP. Imagine the Bahamas producing 80% of its food needs, turning potatoes into potato chips, exporting ketchup, growing grapes, and exporting quality wines, turning corn into corn oil, turning cotton into quality fabrics, taking bamboo plants and making dress shirts, shearing sheep and turning wool into designer suits, turning pineapple skin into leather bags and footwear, Andrus alkaline mud into sheetrock, joint compound, and beauty products for export, turning plants into medicine with a 30% reduced energy cost and safely extracting our natural resources like aragonite and natural gas. Businesses owned by Bahamians, creating jobs for Bahamians. Now stop imagining and start believing. The Bahamas Constitution Party, hope for Bahama land. Visit our website at www.pcbparty.org.
Thank you, Madam Producer. We do appreciate that as we go forward. Again, I wish to welcome you to the Joan Symposium. I would like to apologize again. We did have some electrical issues at the very beginning, very unexpected. And so certain things were happening while we were trying to get on. So I do want to apologize, but we go forward with a wonderful program tonight as we get ready to introduce our first panelist for this evening. And I will get straight to it because I'm excited, as all of you, in terms of hearing this wonderful woman who is going to speak to us of the matters of constitutional law. The Honorable Dame Joan Sawyer was the Chief Justice of the Bahamas from 1996 to 2001 and President of the Court of Appeal of the Bahamas from 2001 to 2010. She was the first woman to ever serve in these two positions. Sawyer was born in 1940. She was born on Exuma. She received her education in Exuma, the Government High School, Aquinas College, and the Government High School Evening Institute. She earned an LLB at the University of London and then went on to the College of Law in 1970. Joan Sawyer was called to the English bar on the 19th of July, 1973, just after independence, and to the Bahamas bar 2 months later. Her career began in 1958 as a clerk training at the Bahamas government, and then she was named the Justice of the Supreme Court. She was named the Justice of the Supreme Court May 1998 and served in that position until the 30th of June 1995. She returned to the bench in November 1996 as Chief Justice, where she sat until November 2001. As we said before, she became the President of the Court of Appeal and retired in that position in 2010 on her 70th birthday. She was married to the late Godfrey Sawyer. They had one son, Samuel Anthony Sawyer. Dame Sawyer has always gained my respect. I heard one statement from her probably 20 years ago that made me realize this is an honorable woman and cannot be denied. One thing she said when someone asked her a question about her being the Chief Justice and her being a wife, she said, When I'm sitting in the chair, I'm the Chief Justice. And when I'm home, I'm Mr. Godfrey Sawyer's wife. So she has clearly said to me how a woman ought to be, women in leadership, and that has been part of my accepting of how we should go forward. So let's present, I present to some, introduce to others, the Right Honorable Dame Joan Augusta Sawyer to speak to us on who is a Bahamian, and she will let us know all of the details in this regard. Justice Sawyer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for your very, very interesting introduction. I just would like to make sure that people understand one or two things. I never left the bench at all from between 1988 and 2010. I went from being, while I was in the service as a judge, I was made a senior justice in 1995 and became Chief Justice in 1996. And then I demitted office as Chief Justice and assumed the office of President of the Court of Appeal. Of course, I was already a member of the Court of Appeal, by which you've been holding the office of Chief Justice. And also I will say to you that there was no woman who was ever on the High Court bench in the Bahamas before I sat. And that was not because I am so worthy, it is because God chose to use the small and despised of the world to confound the rich and the wise. He has used me to do what he sent me to do, which was to bring the Privy Council out of England, to sit in the Bahamas, not any other place, the Bahamas, for the first time in its more than 400 years history. And it sat here 4 times, and it all happened under Queen Elizabeth II. I only met the lady twice, 1994 when I quitted to her aboard the yacht, and again in 2005 when I went to swear the oath as a Privy Council. It is not easy on this particular day to be unemotional, because from the time I heard of her death, in fact, from the time I saw her picture receiving the new Prime Minister of Great Britain, of the United Kingdom, my heart was full, because I realized that a staunch Christian was leaving this world, and that there would be a void that it would be difficult to fill. But then God is all we need. We need to get on with it. I wasn't sure that I could make this presentation tonight. But here I am. And we've had our ups and downs waiting to start. I will try not to tear up. I will try not to be overly emotional. The Queen's death has left a void in my heart. That is not an act. That is it. Now, what is a Bahamian? Well, I've been talking this subject for how long now? I've been talking this for some years. And my last public exposition on the subject was at Kingdom Life Ministries in 2019. And there's at least one other person who would have been at that lecture series who would be very familiar with what I'm about to say. The one thing about Bahamians is we never seem to remember our own history. We seem to think sometimes that we are Americans, we're English, and we're Canadians or Yankees, as the Calypso word. We don't seem to remember that, like I did, Master Glenroy, Exuma, we say that if you can survive Exuma, you can survive anywhere. This is the rock. There were times in Exuma when we ate pigeon peas, boiled pigeon peas with salt, because there was nothing else to eat. caught crabs. We fish from the rock to get fish. We crack rock to make money on the road service. I was part of that. I earned my first Easter dress cracking rock on the road in Exuma. So don't look at me as if I have never been down there or forgotten where I came from. It is because I have not forgotten where I came from that I feel able to address this topic. Who is a Bahamian? As Bahamians, we are taught to honor God and to have respect for one another. Respect beginning with ourselves. And then my grandmother used to say, respect yourself, respect others, and others will have to respect you. Instead, we've trivialized our citizenship by selling it to people who have money. You know that is a fact. And any politician wishing to challenge me on that, check their own records, please, before you challenge me. I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm speaking facts. There was a situation in 2007 when the then Minister of Foreign Affairs was alleged in a newspaper to have granted some 2,000 citizenship certificates under sections of the Bahamas Nationality Act. Non-Bahamians, some of whom, or it might be said many of whom, could not even speak the English language. When one of the requirements for persons seeking to become a Bahamian citizen must be able to speak the English language. So that creates a problem for us when you talk about who is a Bahamian. We've had a situation where in this country, people go around parading their national flags and telling us that they are the reason why we as Bahamians have been prosperous, or that we as Bahamians have become independent. None of which is true. We have our own identity as Bahamians. Those of us who were born like you and I, Mr. Rolle, Mrs. McIntosh, were born. You know what it is to struggle. We don't have rivers. We don't have mountains. We don't have gold in our rivers. We don't have diamonds in our mines. We don't have any of those things. And yet, by the grace of God, a nation was born that stands shoulder to shoulder with millions around the world as an equal part and speaking the truth in love. That is part of who we are. Now, as I become the preacher that I don't think I'm trained to be, let me tell you what the legal position is. Who's a Bahamian? Before the 10th of July, 1973, there was no such person or no such citizenship as a Bahamian citizen. We who were born here, who were naturalized here under the British Nationality Act of 1948, were British subjects and citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies, because the Bahamas, as it then was a colony of the United Kingdom. Her Majesty remained our state of head by our choice. Head of state, excuse me. I'm getting before myself. And if you remember correctly, if she hadn't remained our head of state, the Bahamas wouldn't be what it is today. For the simple reason that one of the major economic units of the Bahamas, Abaco, and perhaps Exuma, might not have stayed in the Bahamas if she had not remained, because they were very loyal to the Queen, and they did not have the same degree of confidence in the incoming government. So when people criticize us for keeping the Queen, remember your history. The choice we made, a choice to keep the country together, to keep the new nation we were trying. In 1973, all persons born in the Bahamas before the 10th of July, 1973, who were British subjects became citizens of the Bahamas. Now you will find that there's some of us were Greeks, some of us were Chinese, ethnicity, some of us were Africans, some of us were mixed from very many nations. We are all Bahamians. Following the promulgation of the 1964 Constitution, persons from other Commonwealth countries who came to the Bahamas were allowed to have belonging status. So they did not automatically become citizens of the Bahamas on the 10th of July, 1973. The now famous case of Darcy Ryan was the one that pointed that out. He had applied, they had to apply for citizenship of the Bahamas within 1 year of us becoming independent. And Mr. Sinclair Outen, who's a member of the House of Assembly, and his papers, had to be made a Bahamian. I granted the certificate under the Nationality Act. And this is going to sound very complicated, but I'm trying not to be too long. On the 10th of July, 1973, the Bahamas Nationality Act, which was passed by the House of Assembly and Senate of the Bahamas pre the 10th of July, 1973, came into force on that same date. So the minister, whoever he was, charged with operation of that act, always had the power to grant citizenship to whomever, once they satisfied the provisions of the Nationality Act. This is one of the reasons why I took the stance I took in 2016, when the referendum was created ostensibly to give women equal rights under the Constitution. To give citizenship of the Bahamas, married women, to give citizenship of the Bahamas to their children born abroad of a non-Bahamian father to whom there's so many permutations of who is a Bahamian. For example, a man, I'm trying to speak to everybody, not just to lawyers. A man, like one of the ministers, for instance, in the government at the time, in 1973, married a non-Bahamian woman. She automatically became Bahamian or had a right to become Bahamian. And she didn't have to renounce her citizenship of birth. Whereas a woman, a Bahamian woman, married a Bahamian man who was not a United Kingdom citizen, did not have that right. The Constitution went so far as to even make provisions for unmarried women who have children born abroad. I happen to be an illegitimate child, so I empathize with them to that extent. Because otherwise, the law made us children of no one, filius nullius. And the only parent recognized in law was the mother. So that a girl or a woman who was, say, in the United States or one of the Caribbean islands, who had a child for a man who was not her husband, what citizenship was that child supposed to have? Because the woman had no real connection necessarily with the country that she had the child. So the Constitution made provision for her, give citizenship of the Bahamas to her child born outside of there. But now we come to the woman married to a non-Bahamian man who has a child born abroad of that marriage. Some of the women I know of were in fact serving their countries abroad when their children were born. And yet their children were not given citizenship except through long years of hardship. That could not have been right or just. But such was the use made of the Nationality Act and the discretion entrusted to a minister of government, depending on the, as we used to say in law, the length of the minister's shoe. How much more can I say about citizenship? We have people in this country who have called even leading politicians, for the wholesale removal of certain persons of a particular national origin to be removed from the country by a certain date. I recall the then minister in an independent Bahamas, namely, I hope you wouldn't mind me calling his name, the Honorable Loftus Roker, who said that if the immigration laws of Bahamas were not properly enforced, the Bahamian of 20 years from when he was speaking would not be the Bahamian that he was then addressing, because there'd be so much mixed, you wouldn't be able to tell. Now that could be used to drive fear into people of the other. I'm not a fearful person, so I am not afraid of whatever people do. It's up to them. They have to answer to God. But I look at it like this. If we claim to be a Christian nation, or that we'll be governed by Christian values, as well as the rule of law, how can we say that another human being, wherever they may come from, is not to be treated with the dignity of human beings by God himself? And as my grandmother taught me from knee-high to grasp, we must learn to entertain strangers graciously, because in so doing, we do not know whether we are not entertaining angels unawares. That's the spiritual side of it. The practical side of it is this. If you keep on talking about the other and naming them and sort of like suggesting that they shouldn't be there, yeah, how do you then genuinely and honestly greet all your guests you invite from abroad to come here as tourists? Does it make sense then to practice what we preach? First of all, to those who are nearest, and then to those who are abroad. So before we jump on the bandwagon and talk and be very harsh about citizenship and who shouldn't get it and how it can be done and so on and so forth, let us first acknowledge every human being is worthy of the dignity and the respect guaranteed to them, not only by our Constitution, by the Almighty God. Let's start there. And then we'll go wrong, but we'll go so far wrong that we create a problem. Who is a Bahamian citizenship? Let those who object to citizenship being given to the children of women married to non-Bahamian men born abroad first check themselves, where they came from, where their ancestors was. Because as I jokingly said to my grandson a couple of days ago, you know, if the Arawaks had the same kind of attitude, none of us would be here, because Columbus wouldn't have been able to go back to Spain. That's strange. Because I like to remind people, all of our ancestors arrived in this country by boat or plane in the morning. Citizenship is or should be a precious commodity. It should not be given out willy-nilly, subject to somebody's whims and fancies, or to create a particular result in an election or any other choice, matters of choice. Citizenship is the basis on which we frame our culture. If we do not have the same culture, we cannot have the same country. If some of us are behaving the way I saw some people behave in other countries in recent times, then we need to check ourselves and see whether or not we really want to be citizens of this country. We have citizenship by descent. And there are some men who married to non-Bahamian women who had children born abroad, and their children are automatically citizens by birth, by virtue of their father's citizenship. How would the Bahamian people feel if that person who may have had no real and substantial connection with the Bahamas in all his or her entire life is then able to pass that citizenship on to his generation, his children, without having ever set foot in the Bahamas? Because you amend the law to make it. Is that what you want? I think perhaps we need to think a little more deeply about what it is we want to see in the Bahamas. Do we want to see an homogeneous people who all say, yes, yes, yes? We want to see an adult population who can say, yes, I agree with that, but I don't agree with that. I respect your right to believe that. We move to that stage. And then we perhaps can discuss the issue of citizenship more calmly, more dispassionately, and more just. I don't know that I can say much more, because citizenship, you can't explain it in 50 minutes. Does that help?
Say it again, Dame.
You remember what I said just now?
No. If Madam Chair don't mind, I think you have said so much, given your own sense of restraint and given the other panelists, that it's almost unfair even to you and to us to even seek about going into other areas, even though we allow for that. And it speaks, what you have spoken so far really reinforce the need and the idea for us to sit as adults again to have the conversation, particularly given, like you mentioned, and I hope I hear you wholeheartedly, that the most fitting tribute perhaps to Her Majesty in and to your generation is to not only understand, but also how do we transition as a sovereign, as a free, given the history. I heard some people talking today about the extent of it, such excellence was shown and all of those things. So that speaks volume in significant ways. But I think you said so much. So with Madam Chair leave, I'll probably give way to her. But I do think there's some things that I want to just further get your wisdom from before the other persons come on.
Well, Pastor Glenn, before you go, I realize that the Dame has spoken quite a few different thoughts. Some things I was writing because a lot of people do not know, and thank you so much, Dame Joan Sawyer. Your presentation was wonderful. There are a few people saying thank you for your presentation and that it was excellent. One thing that I have realized, and Pastor Glenn, don't go too far, the Dame indicated and that does not feel well for some persons who speak greatly about an organic Bahamian, where she said that prior to 1973, there was no such thing as a Bahamian citizen, which means citizenship as Bahamians is only 49 years old. So the thoughts brought forward by the Dame in this regard will obviously go along with what she has spoken about regarding having compassion for persons looking to live somewhere. So while we can't willy-nilly give citizenship, there has to be some level of compassion and how we organize citizenship or the pathway to citizenship, especially for those born here in the Bahamas. What do you think, Pastor Glenn? Do you think there are you have a question for the dame regarding
But-
the many issues she brought forward?
Well, Madam Chair, I mean, I do believe she injected a thought for us to really consider, right? And part of that consideration, you know, we've been having this conversation of countdown to Jubilee, and a lot of that is based on what we refer to as a biblical concept for nation building. But it also means that you have an opportunity at that 50th year to relook at your nation, to examine where you are, to look at the inequalities within the context of your nation, to define and construct what family really means. And so from that perspective, I think it lends itself wonderfully for us to appreciate, according to Dame, how we were constructed in the first instance. So if we had this multiplicity of language, the Bahamas right now, as I know, it is said to have somewhat 40-something nation within it, right? That we really in a much more enlightened age, especially with the void or the absence of the Queen, and I'm mindful of our own sense of emotion with it. This to me is a wonderful opportunity for us to look at, yes, pre-73 and how we came into this idea called Bahamianization, but also to take this moment to equally address it as if you were addressing it pre-73. What is our common language? What does it mean to constitute families? You know, what was the thinking of the founding fathers in that context? I mean, she mentioned an example of the need to cover single mothers having children aboard, so that the child could have some sort of covering in the context of citizenship. So I do think, given our failure to carry out immigration laws, so to speak, given our failure to, and in many cases, like she mentioned, the way we gave out citizenship, that this represents a moment for us to really sit down and almost take on the frame of mind in the 73 to now bring it up to this present moment and say, let's sit down as adults and reconstruct what the next 50 years will look like in the context of Bahamians. And that means people who are in our country, that means people who are born in our country, that means wives who a woman who marries somebody else outside of the Bahamas, all of those things that she enlisted. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to engage, but we have to be civil, we have to be sober-minded, and we have to sort of, what I call, carve out a new path in which all of these diversities can come together in keeping with what was considered to be this forward, upward, onward together. And I think we have an opportunity to do it in this instance.